You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday, or what's left of it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hull, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group, and decided that we are going to do, I decided this midday, and I didn't let anyone know other than me, that we, instead of doing the mailbag, figured it was just a better route to do the post game today, mailbag tomorrow. There's a little bit more time for some questions and such, and then we'll knock out the mailbag a little bit earlier. But hopefully a lot of you saw the video yesterday, because we had a separate angle and it was kind of out of focus, but I'm playing with a new toy. So that's going to be hopefully part of that. And then today we don't have full light set up. One of the lights decided it wasn't going to work. So if you're listening, none of this matters. But anyway, let's get to this basketball game. Of course, I jumped the gun a little bit, didn't pull up anything. So that part is all kinds of fun. But Michigan does lose to number 1 Purdue, 75-70. There was a lot of good coming out of this game, but again, the bad kind of reared its ugly head. Michigan probably, if it wasn't for the issue that we've had all year with this Michigan basketball team, and I speak for me, I think I speak for most of the fans, a lot of people out there, is that this team seems to have real issues with the personnel groupings. Now, I have other issues as well, which kind of happened and we'll get to as well. But the personnel groupings, and I understand some of it was necessitated by just the lack of bodies, right? You didn't have Jet Howard in this game. And then you see two guys get into foul trouble pretty quickly right away in Jace Howard as well as Terrace Reed. So you had to kind of do a couple different things that maybe you weren't intending on doing. But the stubbornness to change when things kind of weren't working, which is when the game kind of got away from Michigan. Because Michigan pretty much played Purdue evenly throughout the game. Yet they lost by 5. Thanks in large part to a 12-0 run by Purdue late in the first half. That is kind of the difference. Now, basketball is a game of runs, so it's hard to pin it on that. Michigan did, in order just to get it to 5. Granted, it was down to 3 there with a couple seconds left until the late foul. But at the same time, this was a situation where it was kind of a tit-for-tat type situation for this Wolverines basketball team against the Boilermakers. It just seemed like they were answering each other back and forth. The problem is every time Michigan would even get 4 points, Purdue would answer with a 2 or 3. And that would have been good and well if it wasn't for that one stretch of runs late in the first half that Michigan could not overcome, with Isaiah Barnes out on the floor. And I was excited when Isaiah Barnes was out there for the sake of, we're really going to see what this kid can do. And first 2 plays were like, okay, defensive stop, basket, all right. This guy is doing, maybe he just will turn it on in the biggest game of his life, right? But no. Then it just went to complete awfulness. And you can see on the defensive end why maybe he isn't the guy there. And also offensively to some degree. I mean, he missed 2 threes. He went 1 for 4 overall for 2 points. But I have no problem with him being in there, but you need to have he needs to be the exception to the rule. You need to have most of your A players out there in that type of situation. And that just isn't what was going to happen, just kind of given how everything was going in that time. And that's what really kind of sunk Michigan in a lot of ways. Now, the other part that I think sunk Michigan, and there were a couple different things, but one of the other major things was, like I just kind of mentioned, is Purdue did not take much time off. They didn't go into long scoring droughts. they found a way every time they needed a basket. Every time Michigan, especially once Michigan went from it being a 11 or 12 point, I can't remember what the top was. It didn't surge past 12, but every time that Michigan got to that point where they cut it to 7 or cut it to 6 or cut it to 5, Purdue always, on the next possession, once it got at least down to 5, they always pushed it back, hit a huge shot. Michigan defensively had no answers. Now, it didn't help that it seemed like the rims were just so favorable to Purdue. It just seemed like they would put up what looked like a wild, out of control shot, and at the outset you'd be like, well, that's not going in. And somehow it bounces off the rim, then up hits the backboard, goes off the scoreboard for some reason, bounces off the floor, hits the top of Jawan's head, who's somehow inbounds and eligible, and goes in. Right? That's like what we saw multiple times throughout the game. And you can't really help that. I think Michigan did a decent enough job of being in the way defensively, but it wasn't enough. They just had too much. Obviously, Zach Edey being the main culprit. He and Fletcher Lawyer, 19 and 17 points together. The bench is what really brought them together as well. 23 points off the bench. Michigan had not that. Looking at Michigan, what Michigan had, 9 off the bench. So that is the big difference. But I mean, you also have to figure out that two of the players who are in, if not 3, were supposed to be bench players this year. Doug McDaniel is supposed to be a bench player. And I guess really just 2, Doug McDaniel and Joey Baker. Because you expect Jalen Llewellyn and Jet Howard to play in this game, and obviously that's not the case. But it just wasn't enough. And yet I thought it was a valiant effort kind of from top to bottom by Michigan. It wasn't as disappointing as some of the other games that we've seen, at least the ones that I've seen. Like I've told you, I've been kind of intermittent with the watching of the Michigan basketball this year. Sometimes I've tuned in and seen kind of the same thing we see all the time. So anyway, all right, we're going to move on here. But before we do, the NFL playoffs are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number 1 sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features to make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets. I did it again. Kind of. Didn't say combine. I said combine. Okay. Your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. That's my favorite thing to do. I will be doing that this weekend. I don't know. Don't follow my advice of whatever if I give you some betting advice on the NFL. I'm over. But you can explore that with your $150 free. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's get back into this game here. Michigan basketball. There's no football, anything to really speak of today. We're just kind of in a holding pattern with some things, and hopefully some more things kind of pop up here. Unless you want to talk about Mason Graham signing an NIL deal with Randy Wise, which is right here in the town I'm in, Fenton, Michigan. But no, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about, we're going to make this all basketball. So obviously just things did not go very well for Michigan overall in this one. But they played a lot better, I think. I think if they gave that type of effort and played that brand of basketball against every team it faced, it would win more than it's going to lose. And I don't just mean that like Michigan's 11-9 right now, but I mean that they would probably win 75% of their games, if not more, instead of being at 60% or so.
I'm not posting on
And thanks to ESPN for throwing a video on when I didn't ask for it. Anyway, If I don't have Stat Broadcast up, I decided to pull up ESPN, and that's my mistake. Worldwide leader failed us. Anyway, but for the most part, Michigan did a good job on the things that they don't normally do a great job of. The perimeter defense, I thought, was fine. I mean, they allowed 41.7% of their threes. A couple of those were open looks. I didn't think it was as glaring as sometimes what we see. As far as turnovers, I mean, Michigan turned the ball over 6 times compared to 12 times from Purdue. Purdue did out-rebound them by pretty significantly by 8 rebounds. 9 more offensive, that's defensive rebounds. Sorry, defensive rebounds. I'm just reading this wrong. Michigan had 1 more offensive rebound, but they were short on the defensive rebounds. So that was a big part. As far as the field goal percentage, I mean, Purdue outshot them by 10%. Like I said, they made shots. Michigan didn't. Michigan had good looks. A lot of them were in and out, a couple air balls here and there. Not a lot that I would say was completely ill-advised. And you're doing this against the number 1 team in the country. At home, Purdue almost never wins in Ann Arbor. But it really felt like Michigan was on the way to, at least in the first 15, 16, 17-ish minutes, that this was going to be a game until that stretch. Lots of pretty much full contribution from people. I'd say with Joey Baker was a little too late. But he did put Michigan within striking distance at the very end of the game. I would have liked to have seen that more, but he finished with 11 points, went 3 of 8 from 3, 4 of 10 overall. But they had 3 guys in double digits. Hunter Dickinson, 21. Kobe Buffkin at 16. Buffkin really came alive in that second half. I really liked the contribution from him. I thought Doug McDaniel was kind of growing up. And I think it's to be expected, right? Because it's not like I still don't know. I was asking myself this question during the game. Who would I have wanted more out there? End of season Frankie Collins last year, or this year Kobe Buffkin? And not Kobe Buffkin, but Doug McDaniel. And I don't know the answer to that. And that's a good thing for Doug McDaniel, right? Because I think we all really liked what we saw from Frankie Collins late in the Big Ten tournament and such there at the end of the year last year. But I really like what we're seeing from Doug McDaniel right now. He had 9 points, 4 rebounds, made some really good decisions. His baskets were timely. It's almost like I want to see more. And I know he's not necessarily going to go out there and shoot all like crazy, just be a guy just putting up shots. But it feels like he has that in him, that he has that I can take over a game if I really want or need to in him. So I kind of want to see it more. My question is, I have a couple here. What has happened to Terrence Williams? He had a pretty good game against Maryland. But outside of that, the translation of going from 6th man to starter, I guess now we know why he hasn't been a starter, which is disappointing because it's just like you see so much potential there. And there's those moments where you're like, man, this guy's going to be so good once he gets to be in the spotlight, but it has not translated. Finished with 4 points, went 1 for 2, had 2 free throws that he hit. That's it. 2 rebounds and a steal and a turnover. You need more from a guy like that. Junior, that has just been kind of biding his time, has been a really good 6th man for this team. You just need more. Is he a senior? I can't even remember at this point. It seems like he's been around forever. But I thought otherwise, I mean, those other 3 that we mentioned, Hunter Dickinson, Doug McDaniel. Hunter, I do have the question with Hunter, is it does feel in a weird way like, it's not that he's regressed, but that teams have kind of figured out different ways to play him. Because he has not been just an unstoppable force. Now, granted, he's going up against Zach Edey in this game, but I'm not just speaking just strictly of this game. He's not really doing much more than what we saw at this point in time of his freshman year. The threes are, I think, the one difference. And he did good on that. 3 of 7. Went 6 of 8 from the free throw line. Those are great things. But it isn't really... It hasn't seemed this year, to the most part, from the games that I have watched, that Hunter is in a situation where it's like, man, they really need a basket. He is going to get it for you. You can run everything through him. Now, I'm not saying he's been bad. I mean, obviously, he's the best player on the team. He got 21 points, hit some timely threes, made an amazing play when he was doubled by Edey, and I can't remember who the other one was. He had the 2 bigs on him. And yet, he still came away with the play. And I think that, again, it's not a matter of Hunter's regressing as much as other teams are figuring out ways to make him uncomfortable. So I hope he finds a way to grow through that. But all in all, I mean, I thought it was a good performance, but, that doesn't really do much for the hopes and the dreams of the year, right? They would have been a moment to say Michigan had turned it around if they could have gone and actually beaten Purdue, number 1 team in the country. That could have been the catalyst. Now, maybe a close loss to Purdue is the catalyst as well, right? It doesn't have to be the season ender, but they've got to figure some things out right now. We're going to talk about the rest of the schedule, the outlook for this team moving forward here in just a moment. All right, Michigan moves kind of into the middle of the Big Ten standings now after this. After being in the pole position for a minute. Now Purdue remains number 1. Their only loss is to Rutgers, who's behind them. Northwestern, Michigan State are ahead of Michigan. Michigan's 3.5 games back now with Indiana, Illinois. But they're ahead of Penn State, Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio State, who's just fallen off an absolute cliff. Nebraska and Minnesota. So Michigan's gone from the win-win, lose-lose route that it's gone for most of the season to win-lose, win-lose. And it very well could go like that here in the foreseeable when you look at what's up and coming. Now, I would expect at least for it to be something like win, toss-up, probably a win, and I'll get into the actual games here in a moment. A win, probably a loss. Who knows? Who knows? Probably a loss. Who knows? Who knows? And who knows? That's where we're at. And so that's just me going through the schedule on its own without me telling you who we're talking about. So Penn State's the next game. That's Sunday at noon. I'm getting tired of these Sunday games for my own personal sake. Like if you're gonna have a Sunday game, have it like 4 or something. That would make everything so much easier here. But they go to Penn State, then they go to Northwestern. So I think that they probably split those. Penn State got a little bit better record than Michigan right now, which is kind of not a really good sign of where Michigan is at the moment. I mean, Penn State's improving. They got a new coach compared to what they've had. They're not what they were. They're not the absolute doormat of the conference. But Michigan really had to stand strong to pull one out against said doormat on Sunday, Minnesota. So you got Penn State, the team you've already beaten by 10 at home. You're playing in Bryce Jordan. Then you go to Northwestern. Another team you've already beaten, but this is at Northwestern. Northwestern's been pretty good. You're one of their 5 losses. Then you've got Ohio State, who's reeling a bit. They are 3-6 in conference after the hot start. They have just fallen absolutely apart. So I could see Michigan going, well, the next one's Nebraska, hosting Nebraska. They could go, Michigan should go either 2-2, which would be, I think, a disappointment, or 3-1, or even better, 4-0 in that stretch. If they play like they did tonight, they will do exactly that. And the schedule, thankfully, doesn't get like super crazy here. I mean, there's really no team, especially, again, you have a tough loss to Purdue. But after that, Indiana, who's been very good lately. They're 5-4 in the conference. You host Indiana. You go to Wisconsin on Valentine's Day. Wisconsin has not been very good lately either. It's starting to suddenly, Greg Gard's starting to get a little bit of hate from some of the Wisconsin faithful, which is kind of weird to see. At least my Wisconsin friends are like that. You host Michigan State, which didn't go well in East Lansing, but we've seen it not go well in East Lansing, and then Michigan run them off the court in Chrysler. Go to Rutgers, which feels daunting. Host Wisconsin. Go to Illinois, which has not gone well for Michigan in recent memory. And then you finish out the year at Indiana, which, who knows? So Michigan could go on a run, but it's going to have to find some consistency. Now, to the point that I just talked about the idea of them, running a team off the court, they haven't really done that in a long time. The last time that they've done that was at Maryland, and that was how long ago now? Feels like a year ago, right at the beginning of the new year. That is basically the only time they have run a team off the court since Pitt. That's it. They haven't really been that team. So what they need, number one, is to get Jet Howard back and for him to round back into form quickly. Settle in on those players that are going to be able to give you the good contributions. If you want to put in some guys that are kind of starting to, maybe flash a little bit, do it in stretches, but recognize the moment that when they're on the court, if suddenly another team's going on the run, as soon as you're at like -5, I think it's time to bounce them and figure something else out, because to overcome that kind of run like they tried to do against Purdue, it's a valiant effort, but it's not really going to get the job done. This was a winnable game. You feel like they took a step forward, but it still doesn't feel very good. You know what I mean? All right, that's going to do it for us today. We are going to come back on Friday with the mailbag. Look for an earlier episode just because I have some things going on later in the day. So we will get to that. But thank you for watching and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.